Hey folks, welcome. In this lesson, we're going to talk about data pipeline and specifically how we can use data pipeline to move data to and from DynamoDB. And we'll take a look in the management console as well. And we'll also see that there are other use cases for data pipeline. So it's not just for DynamoDB. But for now, let's concentrate on data pipeline with DynamoDB. Now, you can use data pipeline to export data from a DynamoDB table to a file in an S3 bucket. And conversely, you can use it to import data from S3 into a DynamoDB table. And here is a key point. This can be done in the same AWS region or in a different region. So let's talk about some scenarios and see how helpful this is. Let's say you want to maintain a baseline set of data for testing purposes. And anyone that has worked on the software side of things has certainly run into this situation for testing. What you can do is put baseline data into a DynamoDB table and export it to S3. So then you perform your testing. And let's say your testing modified your test data. Well, that's no problem. You can essentially reset that data by importing the baseline, which you have stored in S3, back into the DynamoDB table. So you have a quick reset and your testing is just going to hum along smoothly. Now, what about accidental deletion of data? So again, you have your data stored in S3. It's usually good to turn on versioning in S3. You could restore data from a previous export file in S3. Now, when talking about multi-region, we can copy data from a DynamoDB table in one AWS region, store the data in S3, and then import that data from S3 to an identical DynamoDB table in your second region. So when you talk about copying from one region to another region, I automatically think about disaster recovery. So this certainly could be a disaster recovery tool. Another plus is that your people in the second region could access their nearest DynamoDB endpoint and work with their own copy of the data, and that's going to reduce network latency. So as you can see, the ability to move data around to and from DynamoDB tables with data pipeline is very advantageous. Now, looking at our diagram, data pipeline, when you create a data pipeline, when you activate the pipeline, it's going to launch an EMR cluster. Let's use exporting from DynamoDB, and these are represented by the dashed lines. Exporting from DynamoDB to S3. So again, when you create this pipeline, the pipeline launches an EMR cluster. The cluster performs the actual export. So EMR reads the data from DynamoDB and then writes the data to an export file in your S3 bucket. And really, the reverse, importing from S3 to a DynamoDB table, is the same situation. You create a pipeline. Your pipeline launches an EMR cluster. The EMR cluster grabs the data from S3 and then imports it into DynamoDB. Now, an important thing to note, there's a lot going on here. An EMR cluster is being created. EC2 instances are being created. So when you do an import or export with data pipeline, just remember that you will incur costs for the resources created. Now, when you use data pipeline for exporting and importing, you have to specify the actions that the pipeline is allowed to perform and which resources the pipeline can consume. And I would compare this to CloudFormation. Remember, you're always responsible for the underlying resources and the permissions to use those resources. So this is a very similar situation. So the permitted actions and resources are defined using IAM roles. You probably saw where that was going. For data pipeline, there are two required IAM roles. Data pipeline default role and data pipeline default resource role. So data pipeline default role deals with the actions your pipeline can take on your behalf. Data pipeline default resource role handles permissions for the resources the pipeline will provision on your behalf. So in the example we are talking about importing and exporting to and from DynamoDB, we're talking about an EMR cluster and the EC2 instances associated with that cluster. Remember, that cluster is a cluster of EC2 instances. So let's go into the management console and let's take a look at data pipeline. So we create a pipeline and we give it a name. Now, this is important. So we can import a definition. We can build using Architect. So we can build using a template. We can import a definition. We can build using Architect. We'll take a look at Architect in a moment. But I want to focus on this template. And in this course, we focus a lot on use cases. And this drop down for this template really gives us the use cases for data pipeline. Again, it's not just for DynamoDB. You see, you can work with the CLI. Here are our two use cases: export DynamoDB table to S3, import DynamoDB backup data from S3. That's our diagram over here. Run a job on an EMR cluster. Of course, we can work with RDS. Full copy of RDS MySQL table to S3, incremental copy. We can go in a reverse direction, load S3 data into RDS. And note, we can also work with Redshift. So just try to commit those use cases to memory. So those could be some of your keywords on a scenario question. When I see the keyword real time, now note, for pipeline, there's a lot of scheduling involved. So that could be a delineation between Kinesis and data pipeline. Let's just step through here. So I'll select import DynamoDB backup. I need to specify a S3 folder, and I'm just going to select one for demonstration. Target DynamoDB table, so I'll just bounce over to DynamoDB. And again, here we can schedule our pipeline. You can run your pipeline once, and that would be on pipeline activation, or you can schedule it. You can specify a location in S3 to store log files from this operation, and you can work with the IAM roles. Now the default is going to be these two roles we've talked about. So they must be present, but you can customize that a bit. So again, this one is the pipeline role, EC2 instance role. So however you want to customize this, you're free to customize your roles. Let's take a look at the architect. And the architect's going to give you a graphical look at what you're setting up. And you can drill down further and further customize your pipeline. Note, you can set the instance types. You can add optional fields. All right, so let's click Activate. All right, your pipeline is now active. Objects will be visible on pipeline execution. And with that, I'm going to end this lesson and certainly give you an idea of the use cases for data pipeline, not only with DynamoDB, but with RDS and Redshift. So thank you for joining me in this lesson. Let's move on to the next.